Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar on AI in the newsroom, brought to you by TVB Europe and Avid. My name's Jenny Priestley, I'm the Content Director of TVB Europe, and today I'm joined by a group of expert panellists, including John Roberts, Director of Technology, Production and Innovation at ITN, Christian Rode, Chief Head of Production at Denmark's TV2, Craig Wilson, Product Evangelist at Avid, and Rowan de Pomeroy, CEO of the DPP. Hello all.
Hello. Hi, Jenny.
Hey, Jenny.
Hello.
Lovely to see you all. Now, we all know that artificial intelligence has probably been the biggest topic of discussion in the media tech industry over the last 18 months or so, although I am constantly reminded that we've been using AI for a number of years, and actually it's generative AI that is producing all the noise. But what does AI mean for news broadcasters, and how can it increase workflow efficiency and creativity? Well, that's what me and the panel will be discussing over the next hour. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. To our audience, I want to draw your attention to the questions section of your webinar console. This is the place to get involved, get interactive, post your questions, comments, feedback, ideas. We want to hear from you. As a quick side note, that window is also the best place to reach out and let us know if you have any technical issues during the session. And don't forget that a browser refresh should clear up any of the more common issues with slides or audio. But if not, just send a message in that questions tab and the team will be able to help. Also on your audience console is the handouts tab, and you can find some of the resources and interesting follow-ups to our conversation today. So make sure you've got those links ready to save for later. Look at them later, not now, because we're going to have our discussion. And as I said, we want to encourage you to submit your questions to our speakers, which you can do throughout the webinar. But actually, we're going to start by asking you, our audience, a question. We love a bit of audience participation at TVB Europe. So we're going to ask you to answer a question for us. It's a poll question, so we've got some options there for you to consider and choose one. The question is, which area of the newsroom do you think is the best use case for artificial intelligence? And our options are video editing, script writing, automated production clips and highlights, virtual newsreaders, and creating entire content items with Gen AI. And we will come back to the results of the polls later in the webinar. So I want to start this webinar by establishing exactly what we mean when we say AI in the newsroom. And John, as our broadcaster, or one of our broadcaster representatives today, what does AI in the newsroom mean to you?
That's a broad question. Thank you, Jenny. We've only got an hour, and I'm assuming some other people need to speak. I'll try and keep that tight. I mean, I should start by saying I think that we're still in a period where there is a rather large gap between the potential of AI in the newsroom and all the stuff that we'll talk about today, I'm sure, and where we are in terms of what value AI is actually delivering in a newsroom today. But there's no doubt at ITN, at least, that AI absolutely has the potential to present a genuinely sort of full spectrum set of both opportunities and risks across our newsroom businesses. There's very few workflows where one can't imagine AI offering either some sort of new modality of operation, whether that's sort of smart assistant level or full automation, from the start of the planning process through to discoverability of the archive and every point in between. There are opportunities to make newsroom workflows more efficient and also to do things that we simply can't do today. At the same time, though, in parallel, there's also a pretty full spectrum of new risks too. The challenges of things like deepfake detection, the use, licensed or unlicensed, of our content in training data, and the really big picture of what does news provenance look like in a different media ecosystem with new paradigms of search and attribution. So, and then underneath all of that, we've got a really big skills and education challenge across our teams too. And finally, we shouldn't forget that whilst, of course, today, I'm sure, as we often do, we'll focus on some of the more interesting production applications, newsrooms and production companies are also businesses. So whilst it's less exciting, we'll also have lots of conversations as a tech team that we need to have around business systems as well. So, as I say, a lot of work to do before all of that feels realer than it is today, especially if we want to get there safely and successfully. I think our fundamental approach at ITN is around fostering the right conditions and awareness for innovation, but ensuring that journalistic integrity remains at the core of any content we're producing. And I think that overarching theme is what you'll hear come through as we explore the areas where we think AI offers more value to our newsrooms versus some where we might be slightly more cautious.
Okay. Craig, as our vendor representative today, what are your thoughts at the moment on AI in the newsroom?
Yeah, I mean, I think what John says makes perfect sense. I think we're in this kind of world at the moment where a year, 18 months ago, an enormous amount of hype about what things and AI was going to do for society generally, and then, never mind what it was going to do for the media business. And, we're talking here about going from hype to reality, because I think there is a bit of a reality check now about what is it actually going to mean? How is it actually going to be applied, within practical applications that people kind of use. But I think John made a really interesting point where he was pointing out that news organizations are businesses, and I think one of the themes that comes through from us is there's the creative side and what people want to do with our tools and how they want to enhance the creativity and perhaps allow them to spend more time focusing on that than perhaps some of the more mundane tasks. But the other element is that all news organizations that we tend to come into contact with are under pressure from budgets or from a need for more efficiency within the different workflows that they have. And so it's trying to balance those two things out that I think is going to be one of the big challenges, because simply throwing AI at something is not going to solve a problem. It has to fit with a workflow that you want to address, or a particular part of the organization that you think can work in slightly different ways. And I think, coming along to it, AI, to an extent, is only as good as some of the prompts that perhaps are used to it. And for the prompts that go to it, you still need people who actually know what they're talking about. So I think there's a lot of different things that kind of come through from that business element, as well as focusing on the creativity. And obviously, from our standpoint, I know we'll talk about this, what we really want to do is enable people to use our tools in the most creative way possible. And if they can utilize some AI services to do that, then I think ultimately that's beneficial for what the great stories and shows and packages that they can produce.
Christian, same question for you, really. I mean, what is TV2's opinion on AI currently?
First of all, already clever words already being said here, and I agree with all of them. I think we see it from the same perspective, as there are something that are our internal ways of working, our workflows, our housekeeping tasks, and then there is the creative works, the things that actually meet our users. But at the moment, I would say that we are somewhat conservative and extra thoughtful on how to use AI and how to use it in the right way. We talk a lot about the phrase humans in the loop. How do we actually apply AI while we still offer that authority as we do as a news provider? But that being said, we have a lot of ideas, how to use it. But also, I think we and maybe this could also be a topic for today. Also, how do we use and find the right technology platform for how to work and use AI in a big maintenance organization as a news department is. But for the moment, we are currently primarily using it for basically housekeeping tasks, like in work smarter solutions around, I would say housekeeping tasks. So intrigued, curious, and also careful.
Good headline. Intrigued, curious, and also careful. Very good. Thanks, Christian. It's interesting you talking about the sort of the back office processes. For anyone that was with us this time last week, myself and Craig were joined by Tom Butts from TV Tech and a couple, Rob Ambrose and Seth Hallen. Rob Ambrose from Coretta Research, TV Tech, TVB Europe, and Coretta Research collaborated together over the summer on a big survey of what the industry thought of AI, and that was that the overarching theme we got from that is that AI at the moment is being used in that back office to do those kind of more manual processes that relieve the more hopefully the more creative things that, you know, the creative people can go and do the creative things, and AI can do the more, I don't want to say boring, but you know what I mean, type things. So it's good to hear. So it's good to hear that that's, you know, that is reflecting what you're hearing. But we'll come on to that again in a minute. Rowan, the DPP, you kind of straddle both sides. You know, we've had the broadcasters, and we've had the vendor, and DPP straddles both really. So what you obviously, DPP had its leaders briefing 2 weeks ago. I'm sure that you talked about AI. So what are you hearing from DPP members in regards to their thoughts on AI?
Yeah, it's obviously still very much a hot topic right now. And actually, if I look at one of our surveys as well recently of 26 media companies, CTOs, it very much echoes what you've just said there, Jenny, that we're seeing efficiency over creativity as the primary applications of AI so far. I think people are really interested in the creative applications, very much as tools for creatives or journalists, as one vendor put it to me recently, I don't have a single client that wants to click a button and create a movie. But I think, you know, they do want tools to help the creatives. But we're just, you know, that's very, very nascent. You know, very much the practical applications that we've seen so far are all about process efficiency. Frankly, a lot of it, you know, back to your point at the very start, Jenny, is the application of machine learning technologies that has been around for a decade or more, but is starting to mature. So even as we're talking lots about Gen AI, we're seeing lots of the non-generative AI actually being more impactful today. But of course, it's natural that, you know, we start to talk about what's going to come next. And I think that's really where we are with Gen AI, is figuring out how it's going to fit into the workflows.
Yeah. I'm delighted to say we're already getting questions from the audience. So I am going to dip in and out of those as we go along. And we have our first one from Ben Wilcox. He says, there are so many opportunities for the use of AI in all phases of production. How do you gauge and create limitations on what is acceptable to be an AI job per se versus the human element? I think that's where a lot of us are at right now. Craig, do you want to try and take that one?
Yeah, there's a couple of things to say. I mean, from a vendor perspective, you know, one of the things that this whole, you know, the kind of AI debate over the course of the last couple of years has prompted us to think a lot about is how we utilize AI within our own products, but also how we utilize AI within our own business. And what that led to is the production of a white paper about our responsible AI policies and how we're implementing AI within our products. And then, you know, wider within our own organization. And if you actually look at the, Jenny mentioned earlier on about the handouts, there's a link there to the Avid Ada pages on the website, and you can get to the white paper from there. You can take a look at it. I do think that there is going to continue to be a debate about mundane jobs. Now, with the best will in the world, quite a lot of us who started in the industry started in these so-called mundane jobs. It's how we got in, it's how we learned. And, you know, gained experience. And I think there is an unanswered debate at the moment about what those roles are going to be in the future. I think the other thing to say about that is that those roles weren't really that exciting and interesting to do. So if perhaps that frees up people to actually go off and do something more interesting within the organization, then I think it can also create other opportunities. I mean, one of the things that we talked a little bit about last week, Jenny, was this concern that AI is going to take your job. What I said then, and I'll say it again, is I think in reality, it's the other person who's utilizing AI better is the person you probably should be more worried about than necessarily the AI itself taking your job. So I think it's an ongoing debate, but I definitely think that it's important that responsible AI policies are developed and implemented, because I think that can put some guardrails around, how the technology is actually going to be applied.
I'm going to show my age here, but whenever we talk about AI allowing somebody to go off and be creative, it makes me think of I'm sure none of you remember it, but a TV show that was on in the mornings during the school holidays called Why Don't You Go Off and Do Something Interesting Instead?
I remember it, Jenny, yes.
Yeah, we'll show our age together. Okay. Right. Okay. So, John, we talked a little bit about ITN and AI. Where is ITN at the moment on its journey to adopting AI?
So I'd say so the timeline that you've heard from a couple of speakers so far rings true. Last year was really the first year of us getting the right conversation started, I would say. So we, to Craig's point, we issued our first AI policy and set of editorial guidelines last year, which was super important step, I think, particularly with newsrooms in mind, to lay, as you say, sort of the guardrails to hopefully give people, to empower people as much as to stop things happening, to try and create the right conditions. We set up mandatory cross-company training for all staff. We launched cross-functional working groups and a steering committee last year as well. And we started to get in, from a technology perspective, we started to get into sort of POC level work, I would say. That's matured this year, and I would say that we have and I think you felt this at things like the leaders briefing, that I think this is true of the wider industry. I think this year we've collectively got to a place of greater clarity around what we think might be next, and the areas that we're all most interested in, and the areas where maybe it feels a bit further away. For us, the most active work has been around our archive, both the enrichment of the material in our archive with improved metadata and other tools to enhance discoverability, but also explorations of both securing and exploiting that archive in new ways too. And then there's the sort of production tool set and the assistant tool set, where we've internally, like many others, started with a chatbot, but we think we have a nice roadmap for that chatbot that takes us from sort of policy information through to technical support information, and ultimately allows us to keep knocking down technical barriers as we understand how to build a sort of co-pilot for life at ITN. We've built our own transcription platform, which, because AI is in some areas making us revisit the old equations around how we consider build versus buy, I think it's fair to say, in some areas. So we've built that platform because we think the economics of doing so and the ability to really hone it for our use case, for the newsroom use case, stacks up. So we've built our transcription platform, and we're also involved in a really exciting collaborative project through IBC Accelerator with the likes of BBC, TV2, and some really innovative vendors around how we might plug in the power of agents to live production workflows, which is very much on the POC end of the spectrum, but at least starts to get us to a place where it feels, unlike some of the other tools to date, it feels like that points a way to how we might genuinely start to plug in this kind of capability of AI into real production power. So that's something we're looking to take forward next year as well. So it's very active, and there's equally, I say, less exciting, but as many conversations around policy and IP as in the copyright sense as there are around technical work streams, I'd say.
Sounds like lots going on. Christian, what about TV2? Are you as all in with AI as ITN seems to be, or are you still a bit wary and not sure?
We are definitely not as far as ITN. That's for sure. And also a little bit sad to say that, because I think some of it is caused by missing platforms in our system architecture that's causing this problem. But I think where we see it now, we are having a lot of discussions, and I like the way you put it up on the roadmap here, like moving towards POCs, because I think we are getting to that now, that we're actually having these conversations and committees also to discover what kind of POCs would be creating the most value for TV2. But in those conversations, I think we are trying our best to look abroad the entire production chain, from planning to research, scripting, writing articles, all that stuff, over fact checking, video editing, graphics, quality control, metadata, subtitles, all that, the entire production chain. But I think it has actually helped us realize that there's also a lot of different suppliers for each element in the supply chain. So when you go into fact checking, you realize, okay, this is one vendor that's actually really good at this. When it comes to quality control, it's another, and so far and so far. So it actually emphasizes our problem with system architecture, that you actually need to build to be able to work into this more modular architecture that we are trying to implement. But I would say that what we have, can I just say one point?
Yeah.
We have implemented our new story-centric system, WolfTech, that we are hoping will be one of those platforms to supply some AI for the journalists in the first part of the production chain. So we have a lot of work going into that.
Well, that mention of WolfTech takes me beautifully into talking to Craig, because, of course, Avid acquired WolfTech earlier this year. Also earlier this year, Avid announced the launch of Avid Ada, which is the integrated AI into your software, Craig. Why the decision to adopt that so early? And what does Ada offer journalists and news producers?
So I think to Christian's point, I think the caution that is evident when you speak to customers, I think, is across the board, where it is about POCs, it is about finding use cases and implementing things, as opposed to just, diving headlong into it. So, we began work on Avid Ada probably around 18 months, 2 years ago, to look at ways of implementing AI across our product portfolios. And that was first implemented in some of the workflows in Media Composer around transcription and script writing and things like that as well. That's now been extended into Media Central, and we showed a proof of concept at IBC of transcription within Pro Tools as well. And that will then, kind of develop further. And I think the reason that we've taken a time to do that is, because we're looking for feedback from customers. What are the practical use cases you are looking at that you think can make a difference, within your organization? And of course, we're trying to do it from a way that, you've got an individual user who's sitting with Media Composer in their house, up to enterprises like ITN and TV2 who have multiple sites, who have hundreds of users. So finding a solution that scales. And I think we have a sort of twin track approach with it, where we have a roadmap of products and releases that will come out over the course of, say, the next 6 months to a year. But then we're also engaged in proof of concepts as well, which we've done with some of the film studios, looking at film production workflows, and also we showed this at IBC, some POCs we're doing around connecting up the silos that exist within news organizations. So, you have, for example, wires that come into a story. That's one source of information. But you then have video content. You potentially have got social media content that you've generated. Perhaps you've got podcasts, audio. Maybe you've got a radio part of the business. And while they may be tied together a little bit, they may also be siloed in terms of how that information is stored. And the proof of concept we showed at IBC was about some AI technologies, knowledge graphs, and semantic technologies that we're doing that actually allows you to begin to interrogate and bring all of that information together. To really, again, coming back to that efficiency piece of just trying to tie things together from a business perspective. So, that was sort of motivation behind it. And you'll see this as we continue to go through. There will be things that will be delivered in the short term, but there is a heck of a lot of other stuff that's going on in the background, looking at 18 months to 2 years out of, where do we think, we can get to. And to Christian's point around, if that means taking advantage of cloud services for certain things, then that may well be it. But fundamentally, at the moment, the Avid data services we're talking about are running locally within a customer's environment. And that's partly based on feedback from customers about security and IP and protection of IP. They don't want to share content necessarily outside of their own environment. And that's why it's been delivered in that way.
Okay. Well, you mentioned practical uses there. Rowan, can you talk us through the practical uses of AI that you think will drive more value to broadcasters?
Yeah, there's obviously quite a few, but I think I would broadly categorize them in two areas. So the first, the one that we've really spoken a lot about this year, we did a report back in February where we looked at the use cases for AI right across the content supply chain. So we broke the end-to-end supply chain down into 14 different areas. We looked at what the use cases were, both in terms of what's available today and what the potential is. And there was a really clear message that actually came out of that when you visualize that, which is that it's the areas where we're taking content and remixing or reusing it that people were most excited about. So trailer creation, marketing assets, contextual and personalized advertising, and of course localization of content. Similarly, I did a piece on localization 2 years ago. We called it the future of localization. We didn't say anything about AI. It didn't set out to be an AI report. It was almost entirely a report about AI, because I think that is very much what people are thinking about in terms of how content will be localized, is how you can automate more about using AI. So that's sort of my first big bucket. The other one I'd say is just accessing unstructured data in a more effective way. So that could be video data. That could be recommending to a journalist a clip that might be useful B-roll for their story, or a useful reference back to an old story. But equally, it could be operational data. I speak to a lot of media companies who've spent the last 5+ years saying they want to be more data-driven, and they've started by collecting a lot of data, and they still don't necessarily always know what to do with it. And I think one area that we are going to see AI become really impactful that isn't specific to the media industry is just interpreting big sets of data and trying to drive insights out of them. So that's an area that is been less so specific so far, but it's an area I'm excited about when I sort of think of the media sector.
You got a bit muffled there. I hope everyone else could hear you okay. But I just want to say, guys, I'm a little bit sad because as part of our poll, which we'll come back to in a minute, I suggested the idea of using AI to create virtual newsreaders. And none of you have mentioned that. And not that this is about me, but 20 years ago, I worked for the world's first CGI newsreader. She was called Anna Nova, and she was completely computer generated. She had lovely blue hair, a bit like mine, but shorter. And she would read you a news bulletin when you came onto the website. And it still it amazes me that nobody is doing that yet. I know there are some technology vendors that have created that technology for people to do it. And I think there might even be some broadcasters out in Asia that might even be looking at it going forward. But I still think there's an opportunity there for anyone who wants to grab it and run with it. But anyway,
so Jenny, maybe I could add a couple of things on that. So I recently spoke to someone I know who works in an organization in Central Europe, and that was one of the things that they were developing. They'd been asked by a customer to develop an AI presenter. And what that prompted for them is actually a big debate about whether they wanted to have a presenter that looked like a real person, or whether they want to have a presenter that was clearly an avatar. And this was to present bulletins overnight. This was, the bulletins that they were doing overnight. And they eventually came to the conclusion that what they would produce was something that was clearly an avatar. It wasn't something that looked like me, for example, not that necessarily you want me on the television, but, they would produce something that was an avatar. So it was obvious to people that this was something that was AI generated. And I think that's an interesting debate, really, about, the use of AI. Because I think the other thing, and AI use within the media generally, if it can be labeled properly, then perhaps there are use cases where that is appropriate. I spoke to someone a little while ago who told me about I think it was a program that the BBC did, which was talking about people's problems with alcohol. And they had interviewed a whole bunch of people. And what they did was they created AI representations of these people. So they looked like real people. They were saying the words of the people that they had interviewed, but it obviously wasn't the people. Now, we've all been involved in news where you film people, you've blurred them out, or you've had them in silhouette, within a frame of interview. But this was a really interesting way where you're still telling the same story, but you're perhaps making it more personal to people because you see someone. But that program was clearly labeled and identified that these are AI-generated images you're looking at, but the words are from a particular person. And I think, again, it's part of this debate. It's a really interesting way of actually using AI in a creative way, and you're still telling the same story, but you're being open about how you're using it. And I think transparency is a big part of this whole debate as well.
Christian, are we likely to turn on TV2 and see an AI-created newsreader anytime soon?
Yeah, probably not. Don't expect it. But I will say, I think also AI has emphasized the conversation about credibility. Because we all, as a news provider, we have always working with journalism. Credibility is something that is very, very important to us. And AI has somehow restarted or emphasized that conversation. So we've become both more protective and more careful around that word, and also jeopardizing it. So I think some of the idea of an AI presenter is, I think, maybe being afraid of Pandora's box. If we do that, how will it actually start in the eyes of our users on our credibility as a news provider if we actually did that? We've done tests. I've seen the video of our presenters. We could actually tomorrow start a news channel in Germany with all our presenters, and they would be speaking German fluently and perfectly. But what would it actually do to our credibility? So there is something about being afraid to step into that area where we would actually jeopardize what we have built over all these years.
John, are we going to see an AI Julie Etchingham anytime soon?
It's funny you mentioned Anna Nova, because I remember Channel 5 News here at ITN had, when Andrea Catherwood was their presenter, had a virtual Andrea for a while. And actually, the fact that was 20 years ago is in many ways a really interesting point, right? Because our ability, all that's changed is it's now easier to do it, right? And maybe you can make it look a bit more convincing than you used to. And I think that actually is where a lot of our conversations have, from a very early sense that AI is changing everything. The more we think about these things, we realize actually, we've had the ability to Photoshop images on our news programs for a really long time. We don't do it not because we can't. We don't do it for good editorial production, brand, trustworthy, and all the reasons why it's a bad idea, or at least we know where the line is. So I think that actually that very thought of realizing that yes, this is a new way of doing something, but actually brings us straight back to really well-trodden arguments around is it a good idea to have a non-human news presenter? Is probably the more relevant question to us as to whether or not having an AI presenter is a good idea. And look, I don't think that there is certainly no live project here looking at that, and I think we're a long way from that at the moment. But there is something to be said for in some areas we will do things that allow us to reach more people. The overnight example is a really good one, right? If we can produce a more compelling overnight service, there might be enabling tools through AI that allow us to Rowan's point, to put something in a different language or to present it. And that when I say different language, that could be different use of the English language, right, for a different audience as well. So I think I'm not expecting an AI Julie Etchingham, and I'm sure Julie would want to have a conversation with us well in advance of that happening. And that's one of the reasons why those are less likely paths. I think we think that having brilliant newsreaders, I'm sure we'll go on to talk about jobs more widely today. And I think we think that having brilliant newsreaders who are good at creating connections with audiences is a really valuable thing, particularly in a more and more fragmented media ecosystem. So I think it comes down to whether or not it's a good idea, even though the tooling might make it easier to do it.
Yeah. Rowan, everyone else has had a comment on that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think John's raised an interesting point there about trust and about the fact that, we've been able to Photoshop images for a very long time, right? Because, in some ways, the AI newsreader, I think, is, you can debate whether it's editorially a good idea, but from a trust point of view, it's pretty easy to explain that to the audience, right? That this is a computer-generated avatar reading the news. It's the grey areas in between that I sort of think about, like, where does it become okay to use AI, and where does it become deceptive to use AI? If we use some kind of AI-powered color grading algorithm, that's probably fine. What about if I use generative fill to remove an object from the background of a shot? Probably fine in some types of content, maybe not in the newsroom. It's all of those. Exactly as John said, it's well-trodden conversations about what is on the right side of the line when it comes to audience trust. And I think the extremes are not necessarily the problem, actually. It's the grey areas in between where we could get tripped up.
It's a fascinating subject, and I think we could probably do a webinar just on that topic. It's obviously something that's caught everyone's imagination. I just wanted to take us back to something we were talking about earlier with AI within technology. And again, this is something that we talked about in the research that TV Europe did over the summer. John and Christian, do you want new technology with AI incorporated into it, or are you looking to vendors to embed it into existing solutions and systems? Christian, do you want to answer that one first?
Yeah, I think the answer is both. I think we are expecting a lot of vendors to implement AI in their solutions. I think we're already seeing it. So I think a lot of the products that we're already using in our production will get stronger with AI. Back to my point earlier, I can also see that the fact that there are solutions and vendors who are very good at this specific solution and another that's good with another specific solution also emphasizes the importance of this more modular architecture. So we can actually do the best tool for the job practice on finding these different solutions across the production chain. So my answer, I think, would be both. We are seeing cameras. We're using AI for better autofocus. We are seeing editing tools having AI solutions in it. So I think it will be. I think it will be both.
And John?
Yeah, I completely agree. Both. I mean, I'd go further and almost say that there are sort of three ways in which AI will enter the business. One, absolutely through new vendors who may not have a broadcast track record, but are particularly strong in this space. We've been working with many of those around our archive in particular, but also, startups doing really interesting things with social media, social reversioning content for social, for example. So there will definitely be new vendors. We absolutely expect to do a fair bit of this ourselves as well, in the sense that I think, like many in a similar position, we have a relatively small in-house capability that is focused on integration. I would say what we consider integration might be changing a little bit. So we will continue to do quite a lot of work ourselves, and we're really focused on upskilling our staff to be able to thrive in this space. But as much as we do that, we are not going to be building asset management systems or cameras or graphic systems or any of the vital tools that we need to run our business. So we absolutely expect those critical vendors to have their own AI roadmaps. Craig's already spoken to Ada, and we've had some really good discussions with colleagues of Craig, but both at Avid and WolfTech over the last year or so. And those are the kind of conversations we really want to be having, because I think increasingly seeing vendors who are taking this seriously and we know how difficult it is at the minute to have a roadmap, but I think we are encouraged where we see vendors who are engaging and figuring out what this means for their systems and how they can deliver value from AI through their tools as well. So I think it's all three.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about the elephant in the room in terms of jobs and the worries around that. But guys, do you think there are, other than that concern, the worry for people about losing their jobs, what would you say are the biggest hurdles in adopting AI in the newsroom at the moment? Rowan, do you maybe want to take that one?
Well, I think we've touched on a bunch of them already. So trust is definitely a huge part of it. I'm not sure where we're at really with the jobs discussion, because I think on the one hand, there is undeniably some nervousness, though I don't know of any media company that's expecting to lose a lot of creative jobs thanks to AI. I do think, by the way, that there are many media organisations that would love to reduce their headcount in a tough economic climate, but we are talking again about those manual processes that we're looking at. I don't think journalists mostly should feel at risk right now. I'd be fascinated to hear from John and Christian on that. I think definitely the trust and the nervousness around that, and also fundamentally in a newsroom context, especially the same problem you've got with any type of change, which is that it's a very, very fast-paced environment, and people always find it hard to take time out to learn new technologies or to think about changing their workflows when fundamentally they've got to get a bulletin on air or a story online or whatever it is.
Yeah, Craig.
Yeah, there's two things that I want to say. One is, and it's something actually I've spoken to Rowan about, because I think one of the big challenges within more broadcast organisations is nothing to do with AI, is change management. And trying to implement change, whatever the change is, whether it's AI or it's something else, is hard. It is hard to do. To Rowan's point, you've got bulletins, you've got shows to produce, you've got all of these things that are going on, and you're trying to implement other things. And that's just difficult, regardless of what it is. I think the point I'd make around AI is that I still think that AI to an extent is derivative. It's based around learning of other things. And I still think originality, creative thought, that creative spark, that's what journalists bring to the job. That's what editors who are editing bring to the job. That different view, that thinking of what is the alternative question to ask in this, what's the other angle I can take on it. And that for me is certainly something that the AI is not going to replace. There are perhaps other tools that the journalists could be using where they utilize AI for fact-checking, for example, or they want to verify the authenticity of a piece of content that has come in. But I still fundamentally think that, the creative thought, it's the creative person, and Avid as a creative company, we want to support people in their creative endeavors. And I still think that's what makes the big difference. It's a challenge, don't get me wrong, for journalists, there's no doubt about it. But I think that's a challenge that I think journalism should rise to, because I think it is what makes the difference. And I know Christian's output very well. I know John's output very well. And Christian said it earlier on. It's about credibility and about distinctiveness. That's why people would choose to watch TV2 as opposed to a rival channel, or people choose to watch the news at 10, here in the UK as opposed to a rival. And I think that again is where that creative input is so critical, and AI is not going to replace that. It can help it, it's not going to replace it.
So are we saying then, guys, that AI, well, we're looking at it and there are challenges around it and there's lots of things to keep looking at around it, but essentially it can be used as a co-pilot to help your journalists, producers, editors achieve their, do their jobs, not take away their jobs, but to do their jobs.
Could I come in there, Jenny?
Absolutely.
First of all, to say, I mean, it's obviously a clear decision which news program to watch at 10 o'clock at night. That should be a trivial decision for anyone. But I think that brings us back to this value question. I think there is a greater than zero chance that we're on the eve of something quite profound, right, in terms of how it changes not just roles but organisations and the ecosystem in which we operate. And I think at every level of that discussion, whether it's an individual thinking about what their role may be in that, or the sort of conversations we'll be having around, what value does a video editing company still offer in a world where there's a text prompt can make a movie? What value does a news production company offer in a world where information is available in lots of different ways? I think that is the conversation that everybody needs to be having, right? And I am fairly confident that if I'll give you an example, I can write a prompt now that can do a pretty good job of taking a wires feed and producing a decent level of news output in ITN's voice, BBC's voice, TV2's voice. That is not a difficult piece of work. It is as near as free as you'll get to do that. And so I don't think anybody should be thinking that we are going to be successful organizations if we think that is where we offer value, right? That is not where we offer value. We offer tons of value, we think, in having a good nose for a story, knowing how to get to that story, knowing how to get content from that story, knowing how to produce that in different formats for different audiences and how to tell stories. And all the stuff that goes with that, from graphics to editing to cameras and everything in between, studio production. And so I think as has been true at every moment of ITN's history, technology will change how we do every single one of those things, and that will change some people's roles. But if you look at over that 70 years of our history, there were also some real constants too, right, around the vital role of journalists and directors and graphic designers and editors. So I think those craft skills, we have to think that we offer value in this space, right? And we will need to reimagine how we deliver that value, and AI will be part of that. If I could just pick up on the change management point, change management is really hard, and particularly hard, I would say, in newsrooms. I would offer perhaps two optimistic viewpoints around how AI could help. First of all, I think there is reason to think that AI can help us in a very practical way as a more accessible user interface to complex systems, as a co-pilot for giving us information as to how to use these systems, and as a training tool. So I think there's a way that AI can help us with change management. But equally, at the heart of change management is selling to use as a value exchange, right? That it's worth you going through this pain of this training and changing the ways that you've got really used to doing that thing, because things will be better. And the history of change in newsrooms is that equation doesn't necessarily stack up, and that what they end up with doesn't necessarily feel like it made their jobs that much easier than the thing that they knew before. And I think the challenge for vendors like Avid, I think, and the opportunity is that AI can, I think, offer genuinely transformative ways of these systems operating, at which point the effort I might need to put into learning the new version of Avid might feel absolutely worthwhile, because it's suddenly doing things that feel almost magical for me, right? So I think there are ways that AI absolutely is another thing on our change management list, but could potentially help us with that as well.
Yeah. I'm going to go back even further in my career and say that back when I very first started working in the media, I worked in radio, and I learnt to edit on 1/4-inch tape, and I went to join Capital Radio, and 6 weeks later we moved to all digital, and all my training went out the window, and I had to learn very fast how to edit audio digitally. And we did it, and I think within a year we never even thought of going back to 1/4-inch.
And if you'd defined your job as being good at slicing tape, then you would have seen that as a really big risk, right? But that's not how you defined your job. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, look, we've got questions coming in from the audience, and I want to give us time to look at those. So what we're going to do next is we're going to have a look at the results of the poll that we asked the audience. So we asked, which area of the newsroom do you, our audience, think is the best use case for artificial intelligence? And we gave you 5 options there: video editing, script writing, automated production clips and highlights, virtual news readers, and creating entire content items with Gen AI. And this is the bit where I can never see it. Oh, I can see it this time. Oh, well, overwhelmingly there, it's automated production clips and highlights. I mean, 55% of the votes, which I think is, it is in a way doing that. For some broadcasters are using that at the moment. Virtual news readers, actually creating entire content items with Gen AI is just there at 5%. Guys, anybody got any particular thoughts on those results?
Well, I'm reassured by that. on the basis that it mirrors what I said earlier about sort of recutting, reusing existing content, right? So highlight production and clip generation, definitely in line with everything we've heard elsewhere. So it's always nice when you're validated in what you've said and not completely contradicted. But yeah, I mean, interesting that there's a bit of a spread across everything, right? At least somebody thinks that all of these have got value, which they probably do somewhere along the line.
Absolutely, great. Okay.
But I think it also tells something about the complexity, and back to the problem that you have to find different vendors who are specialized in different areas of AI. Who's very good at video editing? That's one vendor, but actually text to speech could be another. And also subtitling is just a sub-brand under text-to-speech, actually making it into subtitles. Audio, quality control is another one. And this conversation, it's so interesting, but I think I also keep reminded that every time we have a staff meeting, especially within our management, we have recently just beginning to talk about that our biggest competitors aren't necessarily other legacy media. It's social media and big tech, who's actually drawing time away from our users. So the thing that we can actually provide is putting a reporter, a correspondent, people in the field, creating real images that are back to the whole credibility talk. So I think also for the poll here, it represents that we can actually use AI as an assistant, as an helper, all the way through the production chain in both video editing, script writing, and all the automated processes. So I think it's a perfect picture of the possibilities across the entire production chain.
Perfect picture. Excellent. Okay, let's move on to some questions from our audience. I'm going to go through now. Everybody, I apologise if I pronounce your name incorrectly. Please bear with me. Paul Filio. Are there any AI usage standards, guidelines, or other regulations for journalists at this time or coming soon? Rowan, do you know anything about that?
So there's a lot of regulation coming in terms of what it's going to mean for media companies, certainly. We've seen the EU move pretty fast on that. We've seen the US government as well. I think what it means for journalists specifically, I'm actually not aware of a whole lot. I think it all sort of comes back to what John was saying about the judgment calls that we make as professionals. But I don't know if any of the others are aware of anything that I'm not.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think editorial guidelines have always been and will largely remain local considerations. Depending on where you are in the media landscape, you might have a very different view as to what your internal editorial guidelines are. As I say, we were very keen to very quickly issue AI editorial guidelines because we felt like it was a point when all levels of the newsroom need to understand that we expect these tools to become more and more part of their daily work, and we want to start to get ahead of that. So, but as I've said, we were very clear throughout those guidelines that the central point is the one that's always been true, which is that if you produce a piece of editorial content, you are responsible for that piece from a compliance point of view, from an ethical point of view, from a fact-checking point of view, and that's why we hire journalists and try to have good journalists. And so yes, we are issuing some specific guidelines, and we'll continue to do so around different types of tools. But actually, what we found quite reassuringly is that really it came back to a restatement of our core editorial guidelines, and that's definitely something that happens internally rather than sort of as an industry. What I would say is that where there is very active cross-industry collaboration and indeed conversations with the government is around, as Rowan says, a little bit around the use of these tools, but more specifically from our point of view, the use of our material in training models at the minute, and what this new system means for copyright is probably the most active area of regulation discussion that I'm aware of and that we're part of.
Yeah. Christian, obviously we've been talking a lot about the UK because that's where the majority of us are based, but can you tell us what the situation is in Denmark?
I think it's pretty similar. Using your basic journalistic guidelines on all our material. Obviously, we are watching other media houses, some of them in the UK, labeling some of their content, saying we have actually fact checked this, so we know that it's not AI produced or it's fake. Is that a path? Maybe, maybe not. I think the theme of this conversation is that we're not afraid of using AI as an assistant or a way to get content on air faster or more efficient or in a work smarter environment, but we are maintaining the whole humans in the loop idea. That it's us from TV2 Denmark who's doing the publication. We will never get, or maybe I shouldn't say never, you never know. We will not go to something where we will have AI publicating content on our platforms. It will always be in the hands of humans.
Okay.
Just on that, can I share something that I think it was actually I think it was one of Craig's colleagues, Kevin Riley, said to me. We tell our teams AI is the co-pilot, which means you're the pilot. And that really stuck with me. I think that's a really great way to think about it. That you have to be responsible for what you create with these tools.
Absolutely, that's a great point. I'm going to give up doing surnames and just go to the next question, which is from Martin. Great suggestion to generate a presenter. Thanks, Martin. Although I think AI will work best in less controversial areas where it is clearly better than manual work, such as subtitling and shot listing. Agree.
I think the survey kind of highlights that, isn't it? Around that kind of highlights creation and things like that, and things like subtitling. So for example, one of the use cases that we've implemented in Media Composer is you can do transcription of a sequence, and then from there you can go straight from that transcription to a subcat file to do subtitling, and that's something that in the past would have taken a fair amount of time to do. And now it's happening within like 5 or 10 seconds. So I think these are the kind of use cases that I think people see practical benefits of shortening the time it takes to create something to allow you to then perhaps work on something else. John and Christian, will both know that the amount of platforms that they are producing to and the amount of versioning that has to be done is very challenging. And I think one of the ways that AI could help in that is that if it's shortening the time it takes you to create a particular story or a version for a particular platform, that perhaps enables you to, within an organization to then produce more content and for more platforms. So that's another way I think where AI could perhaps help.
We don't have very long left, so I'm going to do one, maybe two more questions. So another question from Paul. Given the budget considerations that many newsrooms face, is there a solid argument to be made for the upfront costs of Gen AI and automation tool deployment, especially in cost-sensitive workflows? Christian, John?
I can elaborate a little bit on what we are thinking right now, especially on metadata creation. Is something that we can see that this will be a continuing task that will go on as long as we create content. So in that specific area, there is something very interesting to discuss. Is there a business case on how many people are actually using on creating metadata today versus what an AI solution would do? There is also something as an area as in graphic templates. A template is something that a graphic person has done today, and then a reporter fills in the content. Could we do this more efficient and also maybe create more content that way using AI? The whole script areas are something, but it comes back to the business case that we are trying to solve. How do you harvest the efficiency when you make someone maybe 15-20% more efficient in their daily work? And that's if anybody has the answer, please let me know, because that's quite challenging. So we're trying to find the places where we can see the biggest impact. And right now, I think we are focusing on especially metadata and our archive for that part.
Okay. Final question, slightly off topic, but I'm doing this to prove that none of us are AI. Brian says, got to know, what's the deal with Craig's medals and what's his hobby he obviously gets to enjoy? Go on, Craig.
So I run a little bit. So these are all my various running medals. And so, yeah, if I can get an AI that could run the Dublin Marathon for me next year, then that would be absolutely perfect. I'll just ship up at the end and get the medal and head for the pint of Guinness afterwards.
I don't think you need an AI to do that for you. I think you just need somebody to say to you, Craig, no, and leave it there. That's what my point of view would be. Anyway, look, I'm really sorry, but I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. I've got to say thank you to our fantastic panel, John Roberts, Craig Wilson, Christian Rode, and Rowan de Pomeroy for all your insight. Thanks to our audience for your input, and to, of course, to Avid for sponsoring today's webinar. This webinar will be available on demand in case you missed any part of it. I'm sure there's so much to unpack from this. And as always, keep an eye on tvbeurope.com for all the latest news about AI and the media technology industry. And we will see you again soon.